going to do great. You're going to do great. I said, Aubin, I haven't taught this class in a really long time. I testified a couple of years ago, but to teach it, we'll just see how it goes. So when Sister Glazer reached out to me and said, would you mind teaching? Sister Beers had already asked me, would you mind teaching, when we do this new series? And I'm in my brain, I was thinking January. And then like a day or two later, Sister Glazer asked about in December. And I thought, oh, am I even going to be here in December? So out of the 4 weeks, I was here this week. Funny enough, my husband's not, though. He's actually in Lumberton teaching today. And I was thinking about it. I have 2 brothers that go here and my mom. My mom's in California. One brother's in Florida. The other brother is in Sanctuary or in Lumberton. And so I thought, okay, well, there goes my moral support. But, and I thought about it. And I know Sister Glazer would have been accommodating if I'd been like, my husband's preaching in Lumberton. I'd really like to go. When I read this message, this lesson, it not only resonated with me, but I also really felt that, who needs to hear this lesson is going to be here today. I know we're half the crowd we usually are. A lot of people are sick, but who needs to hear this lesson is here today. That's right. And after the things that I have experienced this last year, I feel like I'm a good person to teach it. This last year has been a very trying year for me personally. Some of you are newer to TAC and to our lives. So I'll kind of give you a little bit of a background. Back in February, my mother-in-law was in the hospital for 12 days, 7 of it in ICU. When she came out, our lives were upended. You know how that is, Brother and Sister Manuel, don't you? So it really threw a kink in our lives at that point. Totally had to change our schedule because now, instead of going to 1, maybe 2 doctor's appointments a month, she goes to dialysis 3 times a week and at least 1 other doctor's appointment once a week. So it really kind of scrambled our eggs, just saying. And then I've been a business owner for the last 15 years, and this last year, my business has changed. I told one of the ladies at the middle school that I work at most often right now, I said, the landscape is changing. And I am not a person who does well with change. I very much like my routines. And I've had to shift and I've had to change. And in May, there was an issue that had come up, work related, and I went and I talked to the person that, we would say my POC, my point of contact. I went to her and I said, I just don't know what to do anymore. I really don't. And she looked at me, and on the way there, what got me to that point was I had been at the school, my student didn't show, I had another cancellation. And so I called her and I said, do you have time for a meeting? Because I'm burdened, I'm heavy, I need to talk to you about this. And she's like, yeah, come on over. So I said, okay. And on the way there, I prayed and I said, God, if this is you closing a door, I've got to have a peace about it. I'm married to an evangelist. He's not exactly the primary breadwinner, okay? For the last 15 years, my business has supported our family. And I was like, if this is you shifting things, you've never left us. I got to thinking, and it wasn't a very long drive, but I got to thinking, I said, God, you've always been there for me. I was raised by a single mom. We were the complete government package, but we never had to dig food out of a trash can. We had food. May not have been my choice. To this day, I can't stand certain soups because my mom's best friend's husband worked at a soup company and we got dented canned soup. To this day, I cannot stand corn chowder. But we survived. We made it, I've never, out of an inability to pay bills, had my electricity turned off. God has always provided and always made a way. And so I'm reminding myself of these things as I'm going to this person's office. And when I got there, I told her, I was like, look, I've always been upfront. I've always been honest. Things are changing. Things are shifting. And I don't know what to do about it anymore. I can't keep going on like this. And she just looked at me and she said, why haven't we ever made a position for you? And I said, well, because we decided years ago that it was a conflict of interest. My business, my agency provided all the interpreters for the school district. So for me to be in a position there would have been a conflict of interest, I can go into all the details later, but she just looked at me and she said, well, if things are changing, then let's change this too. Yeah. And the peace that came over me when she said that, I almost started crying in her office, and I don't cry. But it flooded over me, and I said, well, let's talk about it then. And from May until October, that's what we did. We talked about it. We dug things out. We put together a job description. And God, in his infinite wisdom, has just taken everything that I thought was in my control and in my power, and he goes, I'll take care of it for you. And the peace that has flooded me. There's been things that for years I've said, God, I want a daily walk with you. My schedule is so discombobulated, it doesn't accommodate that, but that's what I want. I want to have a consecrated, sacred time with you every day. But some days my phone would ring at 4:00 in the morning. Some days it would ring at 8. There was no, I can say this is my time with God. I'd have to squeeze it in where I could. Well, when I started praying, God, things have to change. Oh, he made sure they changed. My hours got cut back. My workload was lightened. I now had the time that I had prayed for. And I thought about it and I said, you know what, God? I've prayed for that and now you're giving it to me. It's not comfortable, but I'm going to do with it what you have asked of me. And so I have now made a consecrated set time to read my Bible and pray every morning. And I really think that was laying the foundation to when things got tough, I had built that foundation to, okay, God, it's you. It has to be you because I can't do it on my own anymore. And so when I read, I know it's not totally exactly along the lines of living as an agent of peace or peace on earth begins with me, but the peace on earth in my life does begin with me because I have to be the one who says, God, take it. Because if I keep control of it, if I keep hold of it, it's not going to be an undergirding of an unnatural peace. And that's what has held me really since May. Some people were really worried about me because they saw me go into the front a lot and praying. And, when we were in the fellowship hall, there was a couple times. There was one night I just totally got out of my comfort zone. And I started when we were in the fellowship hall and I marched one lap around. And my self-conscious got the best of me and I stopped. And Sister Honeycutt came over and she prayed with me. And I told her, I said, I really feel like I'm supposed to march 7 times. Because this is my Jericho. This is my business. I don't want to say empire because that shows my control issues, but it really was. I felt like something had to break, something had to fall down, something had to give. And so she said, well, go at it, get back after it. So I did. I had done once, worship and everything, but then I was like, okay, God, and after I did 7 times, nothing felt any different. It wasn't like this miraculous glory cloud just came and earth shattered wall, it wasn't that, but something in me broke. Number one, my self-conscious, my ego. But then later, Aubin told me, she said, when you walked that first time, I saw you stop and thought, why is she stopping? She needs to do more. And I was like, okay. So it wasn't just me. It wasn't just, thinking, okay, well, I've walked, so I have to walk 7 times because that's what they did in the Bible. No, it was what I needed to do. And so living as an agent of peace, it's living, giving God control. And that is so hard. Most of us are heads of households or working people, or, it's hard to give up that control. No, I'm not saying just quit everything and become a slob on your couch. That's not what I'm saying at all. But earnestly seeking, God, what direction are you taking me? I'm not as young as Brother Glazer is today, but, there comes a time when you're like, God, I'm too old to change. I've been doing this for 15 years. I thought I would be doing this forever. Well, now I'm not. A little bit. I mean, I'm still in the same field, but it's shifting and it's changing, and I know that it's for the better. I've had so many people within my family, outside of my family, say, "Wow, but think about the potential of this new position you're going to have." And it's still kind of catching me by shock, by awe, that God is so masterful and is so perfectly orchestrating things. I've had a couple of people that have worked with me for the last 15 years, and I thought, God, if I shift into this position, what am I going to do about them? They depend on me for their livelihood. And there were 3 people that I was concerned about, and each one has come to me. One of them said, "Hey, just wanted to let you know I'm moving. I'm not going to be working after January." Okay. Another one, "Hey, my husband and I, we found a really nice house. I'm not going to be here after January." Okay. And so then there was one. And I told him, I talked to him because he has like scaled back his own hours on his own accord. And I said, "Hey, just wanted to let you know I'm starting this new position." He goes, "You know what? I was really thinking about shifting to this other agency, but I didn't want to leave you hanging. So this is, best for both of us." And I was like, okay, all 3 of my concerns and my problems took care of themselves. And I can't say took care of themselves because I know that God took care of them. So now I'm able to step into this new position and not have to worry about all that. I know oftentimes when people get up here and teach, they tell a little bit of their testimony, but that's mine because it relates to this. God has been the peace that passes all understanding in my life this year. So for this lesson, peace on earth begins with me. So let's ask ourselves, how can I let the peace of God rule in my heart? And how can I become a channel of that peace to others? I can tell you right now, the way I would answer that question after this year I've had is I just had to pray and give it to God. There's been times in my life, a bad breakup. God, I love him so much. I can't do this without you. You're going to have to take these feelings. And he would. And then it was, I don't even know, a couple months later, the man that's now my husband walked into my life. If I had not turned it over to God, I would have still dwelt on what would have now, I look back, and been a very bad mistake. But God saves us from ourselves sometimes if we allow him, if we let him. So, we may sing, peace on earth, and, we've sung the gamut of Christmas songs, and they all talk about the peace and the calm of the holiday spirit. And I don't know about y'all, but up until just last year, Christmas was Nerf guns around my house. Not exactly what you'd consider a peace and calm, but, peace doesn't just arrive when you start singing Christmas songs. It's not just a seasonal thing. It may be a season of life. And that's what I took it. I was like, God, I may not have had peace during this, but I've had peace in this season. And that was when I needed it most. So when the Prince of Peace entered, he entered into a broken and chaotic world. Research, reading, historical, movies and stuff show us that the time when Jesus came onto this earth, it was not a time of peace. Rome, the way they ruled was very, very much with an iron fist, and they made it hard on the people that were Jews. But when he entered, he brought with him reconciliation. It wasn't just between nations, but it was between hearts. It was between people. People that maybe didn't get along before, when they were in the vicinity of peace, there was a calm, there was a welcoming. And now peace, this is one thing that really stood out to me. Peace is not the absence of trouble, because we're going to have trouble. We're going to have high gas prices on occasion. We're going to have inflation. We're going to have layoffs or, rate increases, things like that. But it's the presence of Jesus right in the middle of it. That's the only way we can get through this. It's like my husband says, when we have a situation that comes up, he says, I don't know how people that don't have God live life, because it's only with God and by the grace of God that we make it through. Okay, so the check we got was this much, but the bill we got was this much. But you know what? God always makes a way. And because we know that, we're able to persevere and get through it. So picture this. Yeah. Brother Manuel and I were joking, or Brother Price said something about crazy jackets or, this and that. I said, I thought about bringing a prop, Aubyn's glasses, but I said, no, I'll just go up there and be myself. But picture the scene, that Luke describes. Shepherds on a hillside, startled by an angelic announcement, peace on earth. Well, we have access to the information across the world now, thanks to the internet. My husband and I have talked about, he goes, do you really think things like this happened before? I said, no, we just have access to the information now. You can find out anything you want. I could ask, Dr. Google right now, what's the temperature in Hong Kong, China? And he could tell me, whereas before, who cares? Who knew? It wasn't effective. It didn't affect my life. And I wasn't privy to that information. My life was small. So imagine these shepherds, their limited lifestyle. I was listening to a dramatized thing the other day. Great author, Ashton Doro. She's actually out of the Willis Church. She wrote a really cute little short story about the night of Jesus's birth. And I was reading it the other day, and she talks about the shepherds. You had the young, the old, but it wasn't a revered profession. It was almost like the outcast. We talk about the trash man, so to speak. They make really good money, but it's not the job that anybody wants. Same with the shepherds. I mean, to sit in the scorching hot sun all day and wrangle a bunch of, animals, and it just wasn't a revered profession. But God revealed his plan to them. And what he started off with was peace on earth. Well, they're probably thinking, what's there to be peaceful about? I watch animals all day. But he goes on, and it wasn't the promise of a problem-free life. Like I said, we live in the world daily. We have things that we encounter. Kids, bills, jobs, we have stresses of daily life. But it was the revelation of a person. It was the revelation of of somebody that we could go to and look to for peace. Peace was born in a manger, entering a world filled with conflict and uncertainty. The peace of God is not dependent on our circumstances, but on our relationship with him. We get scattered, we get crazy. Sister Alyssa, I watch your pictures with your 3 boys, and I think, I don't know how she does it. Mine were 19 months apart, and I wanted to pull my hair out some days, But it's because she has a relationship with God. She has a peace that undergirds her and gives her the direction, gives her the energy, God bless her, to make it through. So it's the peace of Christ is not dependent on our circumstances, but on our relationship with him. He promised us a peace in the midst of every storm. Sometimes we just have to ask for it. And I know sometimes we get in our own way. We get all tied up in our own mess and our own stuff, but sometimes we just have to remind ourselves, we have to stop and say, you know what, God? It is you. And you are the one that's driving this boat. And the true measure of peace is not what's happening around us, but who lives in us. Colossians says, let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts. To rule means to govern or to act as an umpire, when I tore my shoulder, I went to the orthopedic specialist, and she looks at me and she says, "Do you play baseball?" I snorted. I laughed. I was like, "I haven't played baseball since I was 18 years old. And that was one time I made it to first base and I quit. I wanted to go out on top, you know." But no, I did not play baseball. But when you act as an umpire, making the call when anxiety or offense or fear arise in your life, peace gets the final word. When offense whispers, "Hold a grudge," peace says, "Let it go." You know, I've heard that all the time. You know, when you hold on to bitterness, you're the only person it's hurting, because it's not hurting the other person, you know. When worry shouts, "Take control," peace says, "Trust me." And back in May, I was ready to just grip a few shoulders and strangle a few necks, but God said, "No, no, no. Let me take control." When pride pushes to win, peace reminds us that humility fights far greater battles. And I'm going to keep referring to it because it's been a very big deal for me this year, but letting go. You know, this is the business. I support my family. And God says, "Do you or do I?" And the way he worked everything, like I said, I can explain it, tell it to you later, you know, for the sake of time, I'm just giving you the bullet points, if you will. But God has orchestrated things so masterfully. So when peace cannot thrive where pride reigns. You can't say, "I've got this, I can do this." You have to say, "God, you've got it." Because it works out so much better when he does. It truly does. And choosing calm over control is truly an act of faith. It's a declaration that says, "God, I trust you to handle what I cannot." But before peace can rule your life, it must begin with God. Peace with God. In Romans, it teaches us, since we have been justified through faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ. When our relationship with God is right, our hearts become sanctuaries rather than battlefields. Peace with God produces peace within, and the peace within leads to peace with others. Peace doesn't just happen. It's cultivated. You have to work at it. You know, I had to build that foundation in my personal walk with God in order for me to be able to fully trust God. I truly believe that. Now, when I was little, you know, faith of a child, okay, you know, God's going to do it, and he did it. But as an adult, I needed something more substantial. So I had to work on building that foundation through a daily prayer walk. And then when circumstances and situations arose, I was able to trust and believe that God would take care of it. I had the faith to believe it because I had seen it happen before. But to be able to fully trust when you were the one in charge, it's very hard. So in Philippians, it promises that peace will guard our hearts like a sentry, but it is activated through prayer, gratitude, and surrender. I don't know if any of you are on my husband's Real Life with David email list, but he recently sent out a thing. And I know we've talked about in different circles about gratitude journals. I know back in November, everybody thinks about Thanksgiving in November, but we need to have a thankful heart throughout the rest of the year. I actually bought a gratitude journal at Mardell a few months ago because you get caught in the rut. You know, okay, I'm thankful for my husband, my kids, you know, you get things that you're thankful for, and you have a tendency to just kind of put it on repeat. But this journal really makes you dig a little bit deeper. It asks pointed questions. You know, what about this situation were you thankful for? I was spoiled being raised the church that I grew up in. It was a big church. Everything, in my opinion, everything was perfect. Everything ran smoothly. Later, when I got older, I found out that everything wasn't as perfect. But at that time, and when I married my husband, the church I went to is 1,500 people. Well, then I marry an evangelist that we went to one church and there was 4 people and I had one of them in Sunday school. But that's where God put us. But I noticed I was very critical. And my husband told me, he says, you can't be like that. He said, you have to look at where they're at now as opposed to where they've come from. You can't say they need to be doing this. He said, look at where they started. Give them the grace. Not everybody's going to be a 1,500 member church. I know that now. We've been married 25 years, but that was one of the first lessons I learned marrying an evangelist was not everybody's held to the same standard or has the same capacity that that church did. But what I started doing was I started keeping a positive journal. That's what I called it my positive book. And every church we went to, I made myself find 3 positive things about that church. One of them, they didn't have instruments. It wasn't a religious thing. It wasn't this. It's just pastor said we don't have anybody to play them. So my positive thing for that church was those people sure could clap on beat like nobody I'd ever known. They didn't have a choice. But, practice gratitude, practice looking for the positive. Because peace and complaints can't share the same space. You can't, within yourself, you can't be complaining about something and be thankful for something at the same time. Pray instead of panicking. That was the biggest thing that we had to learn with, my mother-in-law's situation. We had to learn to pray instead of panic. And God opened doors throughout that situation that we had thought previously were closed, like insurance situations and stuff. God opened doors where we thought were closed because we prayed instead of panicked. And releasing control. Surrender is the soil where peace grows. If I couldn't get anything else across to you today, release the control to God, because it's only then that you will truly find peace in your situation. When peace rules in you, it begins to flow through you, making you an agent of reconciliation. Even if others reject peace, you can choose to live in it. Peace with others looks like offering forgiveness before it's requested, speaking blessings instead of bitterness, listening before defending, be gentle, even when you know you're right. Don't come in, bless God, I told no. Well, let's see how we can do this better. We cannot control what others do, but we can control how we respond. I was talking to my husband about this the other day. I said, you can't change other people. All you can do is change yourself and how you respond to situations. Christmas can magnify stress, family conflict, financial strain, loneliness for some, but your home does not have to echo that. It can be a place where peace reigns. Consider these practical ideas. Start each morning with prayer and gratitude. I know praying every morning doesn't fit everybody's schedule. My mom used to pray every night, because she was a single mom raising 2 unruly children. So in the evening was she found her time. Once everything was done, everybody was in bed, school books were closed, was when she was finally able to, okay, God, this is your time. Everything else is pushed aside. Now I can focus on you. Create peaceful pauses. No arguing at the dinner table, no negativity before bed. Create times where you can stop and reflect on the good things in your life. Play worship music to shift the atmosphere. It's something as simple as that, is just, tell Alexa, play worship music, or, this or that. And I did it the other day with Christmas music. Alexa, play Christmas music on every device, so that way we'd have it through the whole house. I do it with worship music too. Peaceful homes are not necessarily silent homes, but they are spirit-filled homes. God plants peace in our hearts. We water it with obedience and trust, and it multiplies through loving others. If you want peace in your world, let it begin with your words, your attitude, and your choices. In a world full of noise outrage, division, peace really stands out. At the middle school, I've worked there over the last couple of years, not as consistently as this year, but I've never talked about what church I go to. I've never, oh, I'll pray for you, I'll do this or that. But I have had more than one person come to me, hey, I've got a situation. Would you mind helping me pray about it? Aubin job shadowed me one day, and the lady at the front desk, she was the first one. It was kind of funny because everybody talks about how gruff and how mean she is. Well, she kind of has to in her job. But she told me one day, she goes, Miss Heather, can you come around here for a second? Yes, ma'am. I was thinking, what did I do? Did I sign the book wrong? Did I not have my badge on? What did I do? And she comes to me and she says, I need you to help me pray about something. I was like, oh, okay, well, absolutely. I can do that. But she told Aubin one day when Aubin came with me, she said, your mama has, I forget how she said it, but basically she said, she's been my saving grace. And I'm thinking, because I prayed with you one time, and she's told me over time, she said, I just like you better than all those other ones. I just like you better than all those other girls. And again, I know it's because the peace of the Holy Ghost. I come into a very, very sinful world. I appreciate people that work in schools. I really do, because it is hell on earth on those campuses. It's rough. If your children are in school, you need to pray over them, travail over them, anoint them, because it's bad out there. I know, I live in it every day. But being an agent of peace, it stands out, because these kids, these people that you work with, on your jobs, people that you come in contact with, I mean, you deal with grumpy kids of people that they entrust you to take care of them, and then they complain about how you're doing it. Same thing. I mean, men that work construction, people that work, factories, these plants, it's not an easy job. But if we are the only ones that we can control, if we can control our attitude and how we show up, it's going to make a difference. It's going to affect people. So when you let peace rule your heart, your life becomes a testimony. You'll stand out. People will notice the difference. So when we think about all this, let's think about a couple reflection questions. Within ourselves, what tends to steal your peace most easily, and why? If you can pinpoint something, you can change it. The first thing to fixing a problem is accepting that you have a problem. So when you do that, why is this a trigger for me? Why is this something that, kicks off my blood pressure? What can I do about it? So what steals your peace and why? How can gratitude reshape your perspective this week? We're going into a new year. There's people that, everybody makes New Year's resolutions and things of that sort. Let's not just make a resolution. Let's make an attitude change, a perspective shift. How can gratitude reshape your perspective this week? I really think that's kind of a good place to land this, but think about it. How can I be an agent of peace? It's got to start with you. Do inventory on yourself. Am I truly trusting God with everything? Am I really giving him the reins of everything in my life? I thought I was. But my husband even asked me, he said, well, are you praying about when you schedule people? No. I just go by people's availability, how much they're going to charge me. I go through all the logistics of it. I never once thought about praying before I scheduled them. But once you infuse it, once you truly give it over to God, it makes a world of difference.